Now, the big show here, Dragon Age Inquisition, Lee's soon-to-be Game of the Year. So we're going to talk specifically about Dragon Age Inquisition. We're going to try to contain it just to mostly that game. We are going to touch upon some of the earlier games, but I don't want to really get into the weeds on BioWare and everything like that. We can do something about that later on, but I just want to talk about Dragon Age Inquisition because this is an interesting game from a whole bunch of different reasons, and it's one that I wanted to come back to. I played it when it originally came out, or around when it originally came out, and I know Derek always wanted to check it out. He couldn't, right? You just didn't do it at the time.
Yeah, the big interesting part was the multiplayer, and then hearing about some issues with that, it was kind of like, oh, I'm going to pass it, and then stuff just kept coming out, so it finally got pushed so far back that it was like, man, just waiting for that opportunity, and when we had talked about doing a replay for it, I was like, yeah, there we go, it's time.
I didn't even know there was multiplayer in the game. It never really struck me as a multiplayer game. But then again, I guess Mass Effect didn't either, and I kind of really enjoyed the multiplayer in Mass Effect 3. So I don't really know. Just to touch on it real quick, what is the multiplayer in this game? Is it co-op or is it like competitive?
I think it's co-op. I actually didn't even get to dive into it. That was one of the things I was going to check out with another friend, and we just didn't have a lineup of time to where we could both get on and check it out.
So you don't even know, are you like playing your own game, or is it like something completely separate?
I've got no idea. I thought it was something separate, but I could be wrong, so it's still a mystery. Maybe we can check it out eventually and give a little update on the next cast about it.
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever heard the multiplayer even addressed with, like, even when it came out and reviews and stuff like that. So, yeah, okay. So yeah, the story. This does follow in line with the previous two Dragon Age games, but it is also kind of its own self-contained story. It kind of throws you in right at the beginning. I will preface this right now. We're probably going to get into some spoiler territory. We're not going to, if we're getting into real intense stuff, we'll put a warning on it. So just be aware that there's going to be definitely some early story stuff that we're going to be talking about. But if we get into like the weeds at any point, we'll preface that with another spoiler warning. But yeah, so the game does throw you in, and it does so in a way that it's kind of like the way the game tells its story. You're a character that basically wakes up with amnesia, and it turns out that you're being kind of blamed for the destruction of it's basically the church, right? Of the
Chantry or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah, the Chantry, which is like the organization of mages, or
I think it's mages.
Yeah, there's a lot of different factions and a lot of different factors going on here. And honestly, for my part, I played the beginning of this game probably 3 years ago, and I picked up my save where I left off back then. So I know a little bit more of the further ahead stuff. So maybe Derek and Lee, you can help me fill in a little bit on the early stuff. So basically, this church explodes, and it opens up these rifts that the impetus of the game is you are this chosen character, this inquisitor, that is capable of closing these rifts that have popped up all around the world, and they are linking the demon world realm to the world of the living, so to speak. And basically your job is to figure out what the heck's going on. Like, what happened? Why are you the one that has this power? And also trying to clear your name, because as the only one that survived, you're kind of left holding the blame for it all. It's definitely a story that, like I said, really throws you into it without giving you a whole lot of answers. But those answers do come throughout the story. You just kind of have to push that aside a little bit until the game decides to feed you those answers. But, it's a Dragon Age, it's a BioWare RPG, so there's also a lot of interesting side stories and a lot of characters you meet along the way that are well developed and have a personality of their own. And that's a big part of the story side of these games, is talking to your characters, getting to know them, and in some situations maybe having a relationship with them. And yeah, it definitely, and in my opinion, delivers on the character side, that's for sure. I don't know about the story. I wasn't really interested in the story back then, and I'm still really not too into the story overall now, but I do enjoy the characters and getting to know them a little bit more, even with my big gap in I stopped playing and came back. What do you guys think of the overall story and the characters? What's your opinion on it?
I'd say I don't know if it's really spoilerish because of who you find out like the big bad is, or one of the big bads maybe. It was kind of weird that the same one you defeated in Dragon Age 2 is back again now for 3.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know.
That kind of struck me as weird. Like, obviously they're awesome at crafting these worlds and stories and characters to so quickly reuse an enemy.
I mean, was it like, does it not make any sense, or?
Not really.
Spoiler alert. Who is it?
Oh, fuck. What's his name? Starts with a C. It's like Capra Horn or something. It was the main enemy from Dragon Age 2 that, as Hawk, you defeat at the end of that.
Okay.
And supposedly you had him defeated. And then, I guess, kind of early in the game, you go through this quest and you find out, because he at first gets referred to as the Elder One, and then you find out who it is, and then Hawk kind of shows up and he's like, well, yeah, I killed him before, so I guess we have to do it again.
Corypheus,
there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
I know, okay. Weird name. It just, I don't know, it kind of struck me weird that within a game they brought him back.
Okay. Looks like, according to this, he was the main antagonist in the DLC Dragon Age 2 Legacy, and Dragon Age Inquisition. So I guess maybe the assumption is that you didn't actually kill him in Dragon Age 2.
Yeah, I guess they kind of hinted that he was supremely what's the word I'm looking for? Injured.
Okay. Gravely injured.
Yeah.
So basically, in this game, he's the one that is building the rift between the Fade. That's what they call it, right?
Yeah, they call it the Fade.
The Fade and in the real world, and bringing through these demons in order to, conquer, take over the world basically. And you discover this throughout the game at certain points. The game, in my opinion, has a lot of pacing issues.
Yes.
Like it's almost hard to follow the main story, even if you are playing it from beginning to end, because you have to go on these, like, it almost forces you to do this side stuff in order to unlock access to the next thing. And it gets even worse when, starting out, the idea was we would get to Skyhold, which is a major point in the story. It's kind of a point where a lot of different options open up for you in terms of like what you're doing and how you're pushing forward and the choices you're making and the allegiances you're forming and stuff like that. And it gets even more complicated in terms of pushing the story forward when you get to that point too, because you have so many options to choose from, and you have to do these side things in order to unlock a certain power level that gets you access to the next major story push. Which is it's kind of a bummer, especially if you're say if you want to run through it real quick and just check out the story, or if that kind of format where you're jumping around from side stuff to main story doesn't really work for you in a narrative sense, because I know a lot of times it doesn't work for me. I just kind of lost focus of the story, and forgot a lot of details about it. As I started playing again, I started to pick up some of it, and remembering like some of the factions and some of the their motivations and stuff like that, but it never really came back in a big way that felt satisfying to me. Is that kind of what you got starting from the beginning?
Yeah, and especially like some of the side stuff you have to go, everything's like pretty in depth for like what you're doing and story wise. Like you can go to a new area and then now you need to gain this power, so you're doing these side quests and you can get so engrossed because some of the areas are so cool or have something kind of unique going on that you're like, okay, now all of a sudden I'm like 20 points over the level, so let's go back and figure out what I was trying to do to progress the Inquisition part of it, since everything's kind of like broken into the subcategories of areas and what you're doing.
Yeah, even the mission, the quest log is kind of confusing.
Yeah, like I know, like when I was streaming it, I had Chaz was in there, you were there, and I was like, what do I do? Where do I look?
Yeah. And then even I was like, I think you look into here. Maybe it's over there.
Yeah, it was almost more confusing than playing like Divinity or something at some points.
Yeah. And I had warned you guys before not to stick around the hinterlands because it's very easy to get stuck there and do all sorts of stuff and over level yourself for a lot of the rest of the game. And then, it's all just pacing. It doesn't really even, it stops. There's like this weird level of like, I don't like when games are too handholdy and keep pushing you in a certain direction. Like if it had been every 5 minutes, it would have been like, hey, go do your main quest. Hey, go do your main quest. That would have been really annoying. But this game kind of does nothing.
Yep.
It has nothing pushing you to do the main quest once you've acquired the right amount of power to do it. It'll come up, it'll be like, hey, you can do it now. And then if you ignore it, you could go for hours and hours and hours just totally forgetting about it and not necessarily wasting time, but kind of doing yourself not doing yourself any favors by over leveling yourself and sticking around in an area, because there are some huge areas like it's kind of weird how it's broken up. It's broken up into like these self-contained small open worlds. Some of them are really small, and some of them are really, really big. And the ones that are really big have a ton of stuff to do in them, and you could spend like 6 hours just in these zones clearing everything out. And then you're like, oh, that's right, there's an entire settlement that's depending on me for leading them. I guess I should probably go back and see how they're doing. So, Lee, you played Dragon Age 2, you said.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I didn't, and Derek, did you play some, or?
Yeah, I played 2.
Okay. What are your, Lee, first starting off with you, what are your thoughts comparing Dragon Age 2 and 3? Or Inquisition, rather.
We're talking about Inquisition first. It's a good thing to point out. I'm not an RPG. Well, I like stuff like Fallout and Wasteland and stuff, but I'm not a Dragons and Chainmail action RPG fan. I'm just not. So the reason I tried Dragon Age 2 was because I heard it wasn't really after Origins and Awakening, which is the console versions, I think. Of that, it didn't sound like it sounded like it was like an action RPG thing. I could get into this, and it was relatively kind of simplified, I guess, in everything from story to kind of action. It was like a kind of a fairly deep hack and slash. This I find comparing it to this, it's like, because I understand that Dragon Age 2 was very divisive in the fan base. And it feels like what they've done with this is, because I didn't like playing this at all, to be honest with you, but that's more to my taste than to the detriment of the game. But it feels like with Dragon Age Inquisition, it's like they've gone the opposite way of kind of upsetting the fan base to being specifically for the fan base. It's got no real concession to pacing for the outside player, like I think you're finding. Being in the world of Dragon Age, I think, is enough for... They feel like that's enough to get the fans' juice up, as it were. Because it doesn't really have a pace for people coming in from the outside, I guess. It's weird and all over the place compared to the other. Whereas the other one is really straightforward and quite kind of basic, kind of this to this to this to this. This doesn't do that at all. It's kind of, I find it quite meandering. It's like, you're in this world, you're in a Dragon Age world, enjoy. We screwed it a bit last time. So just enjoy this without having any of the focus. Whereas there was too much focus in this one. There doesn't feel like there is any. It's kind of... This feels like a very fan service game, I think, to the series. And I found it really impenetrable, to be honest with you. Whereas kind of the last one was accessible to a detriment, probably. Very simplified. Even I consider it simplified, and I don't really play the series. This kind of... There's things like the tactical battle system and stuff like that. It's just... That was not evident at all in the last one. It's just a concession to the hardcore kind of action RPG people, isn't it? That kind of... You go to above and you get the tactical system.
Yeah.
You use that much? Do you use that much? I didn't use it at all, because it was just so kind of...
No, I mean, like you said, it's for a specific type of person.
Yeah,
like it's if you want, if you know, it's a carryover from the type of game that this is, and you know, I didn't use it because I don't have that kind of relationship with these kinds of RPGs, right? No. So they allowed you to kind of have it both ways. And Dragon Age Origins, I know, was a very, very much a, I guess you'd say, quote unquote, faithful representation of the Dungeons and Dragons RPG system, like going back from BioWare did Baldur's Gate, right? They were... Yeah. Their legacy with RPGs goes back that far, and Dragon Age Origins was very much in that vein. And like you said, Dragon Age 2, not so much.
No.
At Dragon Age 3 or Inquisition, they tried to have a, meet in the middle with that kind of stuff. So you don't really have to engage with it at all. But it is there if that's how you enjoy to play those types of games. And I will say that I've seen people play like the most highest level difficulty in Dragon Age Inquisition, and you do need it for that, because you need to have your characters in the right spot doing the right things, or you're gonna have a real bad time. And that's where that kind of comes in and gives you the opportunity. And like again, it's like this half step between say Divinity Original Sin, which is turn-based, and the real-time combat of a more modern iteration of it would be something like Pillars of Eternity or something like that, which also has pause, so you can pause and you can issue commands and then have them play out in real time. So it's just it's kind of like what they used, how they adapted VATS in Fallout, where everything stops and you can pinpoint your attacks. It's kind of like it's very similar to that concept. So yeah, it's a weird, it's a strange thing to have in a game today, because we just don't see it often. And the tutorial in Dragon Age Inquisition for it doesn't do it any favors. It just kind of like very much shoehorns it in and says, here's this thing, and then that's it. Just pretty much. And then everything else in this game, it's like, hey, here's this thing, and that's it. If you like it, cool. If you don't, then you're never, ever, ever going to have to deal with it again.
Yep. Now, for you on the Xbox, which button is it? Because I know on the PlayStation, it's the touchpad, which is generally in almost every single game we play, the map. So I hit it all the time thinking I'm getting my map. And I pop into this overhead view, and I'm like,
yeah, it's I believe it's what should be still called the back button, but now it's I think it's the menu button. It's the two squares overlapping each other. That should be the map, because that's the map button. But no, if to get to the map, you either got to hit, it's on the D-pad, right? Or if you press the start button and then press A, which is very confusing because it gives you this wheel of all of these options, and you don't realize that the middle is an option. Yep. The middle of the wheel is an option, and it's the map.
I think that was one of my first questions, was how do I get to the map?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a rough game. And it kind of, going back to it, and even back then I felt it was a little bit rough, and seeing it like win like all of these Game of the Year awards and stuff like that, I just never got it back then. And I certainly don't get it today. And me and Derek here, I know Lee, it's definitely not in your wheelhouse, but for me and Derek it is. And even we're like, this is not a very good one of these.
Does anybody know what the reception is from the fan base? I've not really looked into that. How do they see it? Is it a return to the form from the others, or?
I don't really know about specifically the fan base. I know that there are people that absolutely love this game, though. Like it's like, and for certain people, it's like it's one of the best. Like, I think they're going into it from more of a like character standpoint, because it does have very good characters in it.
Yeah. I'm looking back here, and it got pretty high scores too when it came out. 85 on PC, 89 on PlayStation 4, and an 85 on Xbox. And then I didn't realize it was as old as it was.
But I found it a little dry, and seems like you kind of found it a little dry as well. I'm not. I wonder if it's because it's considered a return to form when people were pleased with it, as opposed to it being genuinely engaging outside of the characters. Because I didn't really find the gameplay very engaging.
I think
traveling very engaging.
I think it kind of has like the BioWare cachet in a lot of ways. The same way like there's a certain type of fan that is going to just eat up every Call of Duty that comes out because it's just their thing. They just really like it. And it's the same kind of situation here. Why it rose up outside of that, I think it was not to diminish it this much, but I just don't think it was a very good year for games. Like,
oh, Jesus.
Well, I'm serious because I remember
it was 2014.
it was this game versus Middle-earth: Shadow of War, I believe, were the two tentpole games, and both of those games, if you go back to today, are really rough. They're like, I went back to Shadow of War recently, which I had fun playing that game when it first came out, but going back to it today, and it is not a really prestige title, if I do say so myself.
Talking about being rough and from the time, I originally, because I may not like the stuff, but I'm a bit of a rabid collector of disc-based games, and I had it on 360. But I wanted to get on the same playing level as you guys, so I picked it up on current generation consoles, and I tested it because it was fair, because I thought it would be pretty rough going from a big expansive RPG on a big console. So I kind of got the current gen version. Just as a test, I went back to the 360 version thinking this was going to be really rough compared, and it's really not. It's literally just textures that are different. It's kind of retrofitted to fit on kind of old tech. And I think that kind of sometimes shows as well. It's quite a shonky game. I think it's not the smoothest running game I've ever seen in my life.
No, I think that's more of a symptom of all of those games that came out like that cross-gen kind of thing. Like I remember that was the same situation I feel with like Assassin's Creed 4. That game came out on both, and the Black Flag back then looked considerably better on next gen consoles, right? Because it was running at a higher resolution, they had better textures, yada yada yada. But when you do that comparison today, it's kind of like looking at DVD and VHS side by side, like The Matrix, right? Or something like that. It looks better, sure, but it's not as substantial as it was when it felt like it was back then. So a lot of that, but at the same time, it's definitely a rough game from a technical standpoint. I think some of the character models look really good, like the ones that they've specifically hand designed. I think the characters that you make with the character creator look garbage.
Yeah.
They look like some sort of fish people. No matter what I do, everyone that comes out looks like a fish person.
Got some of that Lovecraft. Yeah. Horrible.
Yeah. So yeah, that's rough. And like, the animations just don't look great. You can tell it's not motion captured at all. They're very stiff animations. There's some good like open world vistas and stuff like that. It can do that pretty well, but when you get up close and look at it, it's definitely very muddy, and the texture detail isn't very high. So We've done our due diligence in tearing it apart. What do we think of like the fact that it's an RPG, and like how does it feel as an RPG? Do we think that it at least does that well?
I can't fault the kind of the core of it. The core of it is generally solid. It's not. You can tell it's not a bad game. The pacing of it has got nothing to do with the way it plays. I think it's a pretty solidly built game. It feels like it should be deep enough for those that like, in all the right. Well, it's BioWare, isn't it? They knew what they were doing at that point. Is that a fair thing to say at that point? I think it's fair nowadays to say that, isn't it? They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah. They definitely know how to make an RPG.
It's obviously solid.
I don't know. I guess about the RPG part of it, I kind of have like a different view of it. I'd say it's like the systems, they have a bunch of systems that are there, but they're very minimalistic. Nothing's real super in depth. Like your skills are basic. You got one or two options for them, and then maybe four overall with a couple different trees or different ways that you can go depending on like weapon or whatnot with that. Because like I was trying to pay attention to like my stats of my actual character with equipping stuff. Like I've hardly changed gear. I haven't really noticed any stats move or changed, and put a good amount of time into it. So
yeah, the gear specifically is a little lackluster, and it's another thing that's very hard to keep track of, because of just the way that the menu system and inventory system works. So it's another one of those things that I just kind of like started to ignore until like I got the message that my inventory was full. So then I had to go in there and look at it. But yeah, I feel you on that a little bit, Derek. I feel like I've had the same gear, weapon, and armor kind of for a very long time. And it's more of like I'm not finding anything that's better.
yeah.
And the stuff that I am finding may be better on like a very superficial level. Like it technically has more armor, but it doesn't have all of the perks and bonuses that the other things have. The armor that I'm wearing right at the time has. And I don't feel like there's enough communication in telling me whether or not, you know, this boost and armor is going to be better or worse than these like perks that I have on this other set. Which is like, yeah, you know, it's like a major part of an RPG is gear on it definitely falls apart in that respect.
I didn't get as far as you did, but I definitely think that the loot wasn't very satisfying.
Yeah, and like I'm looking at like stuff I can buy in shops too, and I have nowhere near enough money to buy half of these things. But I've been out there killing things, selling stuff. Like I filled up my inventory a couple times, sold out what I didn't use. Like granite black walls using a freaking block of cheese as a shield.
Hey man, cheese. Got, there's some hard cheese out there.
Yeah, it's really weird in its loot, how it gives you.
Yeah, and like I said, for me it was just like something I ended up ignoring, just like a lot of the other stuff. Like I enjoy the combat enough, but it's definitely pretty simplistic. And it almost feels a lot like an MMO combat system, where you're just kind of auto attacking. You're holding a button, but you don't feel like you're not like doing combos or anything like that. You're just kind of attacking, and then when your cooldown is up on your ability, you're hitting another button and you're doing a special ability, and then you're just waiting for the cooldown to wrap up again. Which isn't, that's kind of how those older games played as well. But, you know, all the other stuff around it, like the things that we're criticizing with the equipment and the armor and the weapons, and the, you know, the party mechanics and doing stuff like that was working in its favor to make the kind of simplistic combat tolerable, because you're doing all sorts of other stuff. Your mind's on other things, and you're not really there to have like a really in-depth combo driven or something like that combat system.
I've kind of noticed that, like, when you're not using your character, and, like, let's say you switch off your character and then so you could revive it because you died or something, it seems they work better when they're being controlled by the AI than when you're actually playing them yourself.
Oh yeah, definitely. The AI is actually does a fairly decent job of taking care of itself. Yeah, it's weird because I have all these criticisms and these gripes about the game, but I've put in, like, between the time I played before and this new jump in that I did, like, according to my save file, like 70 hours.
Yeah, it's got those hooks that get you and keep you, because then you'll find like this like random story and you're like, wow, okay, I want to find out about this, or I want to go explore down here, and then you get back to your main and you're like, oh, main quest time. What was I doing?
Yeah, you'll find the cool that cool thing out in one of the world's open areas, and you'll be like, oh man, this kind of like adds just enough to the world that makes me interested to keep going. But unfortunately, that's kind of, that ends up being skin deep, because once you get down to what you're actually doing throughout the entire game, it really doesn't add up to too much. And like I was talking to you guys in the chat. Did any of you come across a dragon yet?
I saw my first one last night, but I did not get to like engage with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good, because you'd probably still be fighting it. The
I'm only
dragon
like level 10.
Yeah, the dragon encounters are, at least the few that I've done, I've probably done 3, have been extremely underwhelming. It's like, imagine the worst bullet sponge enemy from an RPG, and that's pretty much it. Because of the combat where you're just holding one button and you're doing the same thing over and over again, just waiting for cooldowns, that's gets dragged out to like no kidding, like a 10 to 15 minute event where you're just pounding this thing that is doing some damage to you. Like, they're not super powerful that they're like wiping your squad with one hit or anything like that. So it's just really this battle of attrition. And it's just, they're not like, for a game called Dragon Age about, you know, fighting dragons and stuff like that, it just does not live up to the name, that's for sure. I mean, you get some cool loot. Like, you get a ton of stuff when you beat a dragon, but like, even looking back at fighting a dragon in Skyrim, and I would probably choose that over fighting dragons in this game.
I've got no idea what you're both talking about. You lost me back when Derek started talking about cheese. and ever since then, you've just been talking. I'm like, cheese shield, yeah. Somebody said hard cheese, and I just lost me. And my brain went. But yeah, good game.
His shield, giant block of cheese as a shield.
And
it's like an epic too. So I'm like, it even like when I noticed what it was, I was like, this was a purple too. And what?
I got confused because hard cheese is a phrase here. Oh, cheese, mate. There you go.
Is that like
bad luck.
tough luck?
Yeah. Tough
Yeah.
luck. But, oh, cheese, mate. There you go. We've learned. We've learned something.
All right.
Right.
Iron Bull is played by Freddie Prinze Jr.
At least he's getting work, I suppose.
Yeah, in 2014. I don't think Freddie Prinze Jr. needs any work these days. I think he made quite a bit of money.
Where'd you go once you've Fred from Scooby-Doo? I mean, really?
Retirement. Or Iron Bull from Dragon Age Inquisition.
Fire on that cravat cash.
And yeah, there's definitely some good characters in this game.
Oh.
It's just a shame that you have to pick through all of this kind of mediocre stuff to get to it. I think like Varric is a very good character, and who like when you get to know, when you get to Skyhold is when you really get to talk to some of the characters that you don't actually get to play with. And like Liliana ends up being a pretty good character.
I think Cole is one of my favorite characters so far.
Cole, yeah, I don't like Cole. Every decision I'm making, Cole is not liking. For some reason, it's like literally every decision I'm making, it's like Cole extremely disapproves.
Like, I like the fact that he's trying to find humanity, even though he is what he is, and he wants to fit in and help out. So, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just kind of interesting to see how that all played out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, there are some. I know a little bit about how this game ends, and I'm not going to get into that, but suffice it to say, it does have a pretty good surprise at the end, and it is extremely divisive amongst the not in like a poorly executed or anything like that, just it's very divisive in how fans of the characters reacted to it, depending on who you were following and who you enjoyed the most. Yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say about this game. And I think I kind of wrap it up with, for me anyway, the fact that I have put so much time into it, so there is something somewhat enjoyable that I'm finding in it. It's just when I really start to look at it and like have the conversation with you guys, it's like, man, there's so much that is like really not great about this game. Like, why am I spending so much time playing it? And I still like, yeah, there's cool little twinkles here and there that bring me on, but I think it's mostly just like a and this is not a good thing for an RPG, but it ends up being just like I can turn my mind off and just wander around in a world for a while, and then with no stakes, and then just leave it behind me and not think about it too much more, which, like I just said, is not good for an RPG of this kind of stature.
You should put that quote in the box.
Yeah.
Across the back.
Yeah, it's in our list. Yeah. Maybe when they release the Dragon Age trilogy remaster, they'll throw that on it.
You make me play that again.
Yeah, so does anybody else have anything else they want to add before we wrap it up?
Oh, real quick, the weird thing that, like, as part of, like, the RPG thing, partway through the game, you then get a choice to, like, further develop your character, and it just kind of, like, came out of nowhere, and that kind of threw me off too.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of
Yeah.
throw that in there because that kind of like it just happened to me. So I was like, because kind of thinking like looking at it like, all right, cool. So I'm leveling slowly. We're getting these points, but I'm almost done getting all these skills. Like, what's next?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, by the way, now you got to go do all this stuff to unlock one of these 3 things, and then there you go. There's something else to work on.
Yeah, just like the rest of the game, it just kind of throws it on at a certain point, and is just like, here it is, go do it.
Yeah, like it's got its small things that it does
Hope you like it because this is it.
But collectively, it's just, nah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll be 4 years in now, aren't we, from when it released? In the spirit of the replay thing, would you recommend it to somebody that to pick it up now, 4 years later, that hadn't played it before? Is it still worth a look, do you think?
What did you picked up a physical copy? What did you pay for it?
I paid what would be about $10.
I'd say for $10, sure.
Yeah.
Like, I would say that there's probably $10 worth of enjoyment that you could have out of that. Especially if you're into the characters and can get through and suss out the story. And especially if you're a fan of the series and want to, you know, revisit these, like, see these characters again, these reoccurring characters. But if you're not into any of that, it starts to become a more difficult recommendation. But for $10, it's hard. It's hard for me to say no.
I'd probably say like when the complete edition's on sale for like $20, that would be a good deal. Because I think when I picked it, because I picked it up a while ago, I just never played it because it was on sale. But it was $40 for the complete, which was the game, all the DLC and all that. But that was like a while ago.
Yeah.
But I know every now and then I've seen it down around like 20 or so, or the 15 when PlayStation does its like really weird sales.
Yeah.
I'll give it this. It's made me want to look more, maybe a little bit more into the lore. Because I know there's novels that are based around it, and kind of there's a couple of animes, I think. I might look into those because they are interesting characters.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like world building, you know, BioWare, I don't know about now, but then they were like the premier. Them and probably Bethesda were the two that were making the most in-depth and strides in that, you know, American RPGs, Western RPGs. I mean, like, Mass Effect is like, is on par with like the lore of Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff like that in terms of how in-depth it gets. So, there's definitely a lot to dig in there.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, they just announced that there's going to be a collection of old CRPGs coming out for consoles, and I think they said PC as well, like Baldur's Gate 1, 2, Icewind Dale, Neverwinter Nights. They're, I guess, I don't know how much they're remastering them or what they're doing to them specifically, but they're kind of putting them all into a big collection. Not BioWare, just it's some other company that
Skybound or Skybox.
Skybound, Skybound.
Yeah. That's going to be coming out later this year, which is pretty cool. And the Larian Studios, the people that made Divinity and Divinity 2, teasing possibly a Baldur's Gate 3. So we'll see how that pans out. Because there have been some games that have come up that are like I mentioned earlier, Pillars of Eternity, There was, I think it's the same company, the same people that did a game called Torment, that, or something like that. It starts with a T, I think.
I think it's
It's Torment, yeah. And those are in the same ballpark as that. And of course, Divinity: Original Sin is a very, very, as Derek would put it, probably the most Dungeons and Dragons RPG there is out there right now.
Yeah, it's super in depth. Like, even more, like, because I played a lot of Neverwinter when they brought that out, and it's even more in depth than that was. Like, and like that's the way a lot of people are like explaining it too. Where like you got to think of it as you're sitting down to play essentially a game of D&D, kind of like board game-ish, like, because you're moving around like that when in combat. But yeah, it's by far the best representation of D&D in game form.
Yeah. Yeah, so that it seems like we're in a bit of a, I guess you could call it, renaissance of that type of game, with this collection coming out and possibly revisiting Baldur's Gate as a whole new game. So I guess we'll see where that goes. So Lee, good news for you. More fantasy RPGs coming your way.
I can't wait to hear you talk about them.
All right, that is going to wrap up our discussion, our replay on Dragon Age Inquisition. I hope it didn't make you too mad, but that's kind of, sometimes that's how it goes. Sometimes you start talking about a game and you realize, oh, it has a lot of problems. Thank you for joining us on this very special episode of Voxel Viewpoint. If you'd like to hear or see more, please consider subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app, subscribing to us on YouTube, or visiting voxelvoice.com, where all of our great content comes together in one place. Also check out the Voxel Voice Facebook group, where you can join in on the discussion with a great, like-minded community.